Sengoku Japan is one of those historical eras you see all over the place. Known for epic samurai battling one another to unite a war-torn nation, and for legendary figures such as Nobunaga Oda, Hideyoshi Toyotomi, Ieyasu Tokugawa, Masamune Date, and Yukimura Sanada, the era's influence can be seen in media all over the world. The period has inspired anime, literature, television, and perhaps most notably to some, the many films of Akira Kurosawa and the design of Darth Vader's helmet in Star Wars. Sengoku Japan as a setting is also no stranger to the realm of gaming, with the best-known franchises that take place during the era being Koei Tecmo's Samurai Warriors, Nobunaga's Ambition, and Nioh. But Koei isn't the only company to take inspiration from this bloody chapter of history. Far from it, in fact. One company has the franchise set in Sengoku Japan that's so beloved by its fans, they constantly call for its return. One that tackles the drama, mystery, and intrigue of the era, while still retaining a sense of humor. A legendary Capcom franchise that debuted on the PS2, with its latest entry releasing on the PS4. That's right. Today I'm going to be talking about... Okay, so I'm not going to be talking about that game because I don't know a whole lot about Onimusha. I just need to scroll up a bit. There we go.
Let's party! Yeah!
When it comes to gaming franchises that I pull out of left field to show my qualifications as a real gamer, Sengoku Basara is always at the top of that list. I've known hardcore Capcom pros and creators who've never even heard of the franchise before meeting me. So, you know, I guess I got that going for me. And the second they give me an inch to talk about it, biggest mistake of their life. But in all seriousness, there is a lot to talk about when it comes to the franchise, and not too many people talking about it, in the West at least. In Japan, it's a massively popular series that was credited with getting people interested in history, specifically women. And it's not because it doesn't have fans in the West, it has a really dedicated fan base. I myself am in many different fan communities for the series, some of which are working on translation projects for the many entries that never saw the light of day outside of Asia. So, why is that the case? It's certainly not unheard of for early entries of many franchises to be stuck in Japan while the rest of it was localized. I can think of early Shin Megami Tensei as examples of games that definitely need to be brought over at some point, but at least from what I can research, it's not as common from the PS2 onward. And, well, especially not today when it's an anomaly for a large franchise from a big developer to be repeatedly relegated to a specific region of the globe. And, oddly, at a time when Capcom is a bit more willing to re-release Japan-exclusive games on a global scale. So, again, why make this now? Maybe I want to learn a new skill with making video essays. Maybe I like the challenge of headbutting video editing software until it does what I command. Maybe because with each passing Capcom showcase, I can feel my soul and all my hopes leave my body from another Basara-less year. No. In reality, it's because Sengoku Basara people usually only make content for other fans, and we tend to be somewhat insular because of that. I don't know how many people might be interested in the series, especially considering how not consumer-friendly it is for anyone, never mind if you live in the West. Though, it should be noted that the stories and a lot of the in-game descriptions have been translated, and are found online in forms or videos, all done by the very dedicated fanbase. But I'd rather spread the word of this franchise than simply keep it hidden amongst a few people. I guess I should explain what exactly Sengoku Basara is. Sengoku Basara is a crowd combat game developed by Capcom with games on the PlayStation 2, 3, PSP, and 4. The gameplay footage that you'll be seeing for this video will be primarily from the HD collection of the first 3 games on PS3, as that's the easiest way to play those games today. As mentioned earlier, it takes place during the Sengoku era and concerns the exploits of the many famous daimyo, strategists, and mythical figures of the time. The series is known for fast-paced action, over-the-top set pieces, and for just being the cheesiest goddamn thing on the planet. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds a lot like Samurai Warriors, and well, you're not wrong, but Basara does enough differently to stand on its own, and that's especially true from 3 onward, but we'll talk about that later. You're probably wondering how this series came to be in the first place. Well, why don't we take a look at the first game and see where it all began. Sengoku Basara is the brainchild of director Makoto Yamamoto and producer Hiroyuki Kobayashi, whom you may know from Dragon's Dogma, Devil May Cry, and Resident Evil. It was the end of the year 2003, and Capcom had faced some heavy losses in the past 2 quarters. Kobayashi, earlier that year, proposed an action game based on feudal warlords, but given that Capcom wanted to focus on established franchises, there was some hesitancy, especially considering Onimusha was, in the eyes of some, already a game that filled that role. Despite the many workers who doubted Kobayashi's vision and whether there would be confusion with Onimusha, then President Kenzo Tsujimoto supported Kobayashi, ultimately getting the ball rolling on what would become Sengoku Basara. During production, Kobayashi's vision would continue to be met with doubt, with many staff members opting to work on any other project. Criticized for its philosophy of simplicity and dealing with infighting amongst the team, Sengoku Basara seemed like a cursed project. Due to the issues with development, Kobayashi had to find someone who'd be able to steer the project in the right direction, and that's where Yamamoto came in. You can thank him for the core focus of the series, emphasizing larger-than-life characters to balance out the simplicity of the gameplay. He figured if the characters are over the top enough, then it won't really matter how simple the action is. And while we'll get into more detail, some of these examples of over the top are legendary, such as Masamune's English, Mecha Tadakatsu, the overwhelming machismo of Yukimura and Takeda, and okay, so some things probably could have been workshopped a little bit more, but I digress. It was through this new direction that the team was able to get revitalized for the project, turning something that was looked down upon by everyone at Capcom at the time into an enjoyably camp and hype game, and thus, Sengoku Basara arrived in stores on July 21st, 2005. So, as mentioned before, Sengoku Basara is a crowd combat game that, at its core, plays like other genre staples Musou and Senran Kagura. In comparison to those 2 games, Basara is, surprisingly enough for its simplicity, probably the most complex of the bunch. Like those games, the player assumes one of a select group of skillful warriors and plays through various stages with the goal of defeating the boss at the end. As you control your chosen warlord, you are able to do the standard stuff: basic attacks, strong attacks, which in Basara are dubbed skills, both of which can be grounded or aerial, mount horses, guard, dodge, parry, and utilize a devastating super attack, here dubbed Basara skill. So far, nothing super out of the ordinary. However, skills are where things are a little different. Instead of a standard light and heavy attack, the normal arts and unique skills aren't connected to one another the way they are in Musou. For instance, instead of having strong attacks that change depending on how many light attacks you use ahead of time, the unique skills act the same every time you use them. You can equip 2 at a time and switch between them in battle, and these skills aren't exclusively attacks either. Masamune and Itsuki, for instance, have install skills that briefly change their entire normal art combos. Due to the ability to mix and match unique skill sets and the fact that you can use them at any point during a combo, the combat system, at least in comparison to other crowd combat games at the time, had a lot more depth, and that depth only expands in future entries. In addition, each character has 3 item slots that fit a variety of different items with effects that include increased attack, higher item drop rates, altering properties of skills, and even infinite Basara gauge. And these items, in contrast to how they are in other crowd combat games where they may apply a brief buff or heal you, apply their effects for the whole battle and are more noticeable. Beyond that, some of them are situational. For instance, Yukimura has a unique item that, when he's low on health, will activate a light version of Takeda's Basara attack, creating a shield. These items, alongside the different weapons that characters can equip that carry their own effects, stats, and elemental properties, are earned by playing through various stages in the game. The elements on hand are fire, ice, lightning, and darkness. Fire deals damage over time, ice freezes enemies, lightning has a small area of effect that can spread to nearby enemies, and darkness deals massive damage but costs the player HP, which can then be absorbed back from the enemy. These weapons also sometimes hide Capcom references. Given that most of the team for these games also worked on Devil May Cry, there are a plethora of callbacks to that series throughout the entirety of Sengoku Basara. Hell, one of the characters is just Virgil, but Japanese.
What is this? Mitsunari.
Stages can be played in one of two modes, Unification Mode and Free Mode. We'll start with the easier one. Free Mode is what it sounds like. You can pick any officer and go into any stage, though interestingly enough, you're only able to do it completely once you have unlocked everyone and beaten the story with them. Each officer's story is found in the aforementioned Unification Mode, which is a series of battles that the player participates in with the goal of unifying Japan. In a lot of ways, it's a glorified arcade ladder, and, especially in the first century, it's incredibly bare bone. Essentially, as your officer's clan defeats more and more opposing clans, so do your enemies. And this goes on until there are only 2 clans left, and they fight and your clan wins, and you get your character's ending. Along the way, you get items that change in rarity based on the difficulty you play, going from normal to hard to extreme to random, in which the difficulty of each individual stage changes, but you're able to earn higher tiered weapons and items easier. One final note on Unification Mode is that if 2 notable officers with explicit history encounter one another, there'll be an animated cutscene before the battle that sets the story. It isn't too much, but if you're a fan of history or the original characters, you'll enjoy them for what additional tidbits of story they add. And it's interesting to see, given that certain character dynamics that would be fundamental to the franchise's identity weren't completely set in stone yet. Speaking of the characters, there are a total of 21 characters in the game, 16 of which are playable. In our roster, we have Masamune Date, the poster boy of the franchise whose cool demeanor is matched by his love of thrilling battles and his hype as hell English.
Are you ready, guys? Welcome to Fortress of Dragon! Be yourself! My liver.
Next is Yukimura Sanada, a hot-headed combatant who fights on behalf of his lord, Shingen Takeda, a massive figure wielding a mighty axe who imparts the values of loyalty and strength onto Yukimura, seeking to set him up as the future of Takeda. They're accompanied by Sasuke Sarutobi, who can be summed up as completely done with this shit every time Yukimura and Takeda get going. Of course, Takeda's rival, Kenshin Uesaki, is here, whom is of an ambiguous gender with feminine speech patterns that may or may not be a reference to the fact that he could have been a trans man in real life. Kasuga, his right hand, who... Yeah, I already mentioned that, but fun fact, she's named after a castle he owned. Next is Yoshihiro Shimazu, a burly old man from the south who fights with a giant sword using a kendo style. After that is Itsuki, a cheery maiden who is the game's representation of the Ainu people, for better or worse, and who fights with a mystical hammer sent to her by a goddess. Zavi, the game's stand-in and commentary on the Jesuits and Francis Xavier himself, is a goof who uses robots and explosives to achieve his goals of spreading love and Zavism. Tadakatsu Honda, the legendary warrior who served under Ieyasu Tokugawa, is seen here portrayed as a mecha under Tokugawa's control, which is something that's actually brought up in the special anniversary Making of Sengoku Basara page available on Capcom's website as one of the big moments that demonstrated the philosophy behind the character designs. Next are Toshii Maeda and his wife Matsu, 2 warlords under the service of Nobunaga. Matsu is a loving wife and excellent cook who pairs well with the perpetually hungry, yet eternally devoted Toshie. I love these 2 and their wholesome marriage.
The Maeda clan's rules are guard Matsu, guard
your
Matsu,
skills,
and
most
guard
importantly,
Matsu.
protect the clan's leader. What'd you say? You got them all wrong, Toshie.
After that is Mitsuhide Akechi, who, unlike his usual depiction as a nobleman who has to make a hard choice of betraying his lord, is a bloodthirsty maniac seeking his next thrill with Nobunaga serving as his ultimate game. For the remaining Oda clan, we have Ranmaru Mori, Nobunaga's young retainer who has an energetic spirit, idolizes his lord, and fights with a bow and arrow. Again, a different depiction from some more common interpretations. Nohime, clad in a black kimono, whom I absolutely love, and the man himself, Nobunaga Oda, a demon of a human being hell-bent on unifying, or rather conquering, Japan with the powers of darkness. A pretty interesting cast, wouldn't you say? And each one, even in this first entry, play differently from one another in a way that I feel other crowd combat games don't really capture. In a lot of these games, because of how the combat system usually works, most characters still feel generally the same to one another with a few minor adjustments here and there. I never feel like I'm swinging a massive weapon or moving at the speed of light in a lot of these games, instead feeling a tad bit slower or faster than the average cast, save for the Greatsword and Nunchaku weapons in Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8. But, right from the get-go, Shimazu, Sabi, Itsuki, Takeda, and Tadakatsu, with their heavy weapons and massive frames, feel different than the ninjas, Kenshin, and Ranmaru, who are light on their feet, and even those in the middle like Masamune and Yukimura fittingly feel like a meeting point between the two ends. For the warlords present but not playable, we have Motonari Mori, Motochika Chosokabe, Ujimasa Hojo, Yoshimoto Emegawa, and Ieyasu Tokugawa. There isn't much to say about these 5 right now. Gameplay-wise, they either copy Toshie or Kenshin's moves. Despite that fact, each character has their own assigned stage, with some appearing or being featured in multiple stages. And, on top of that, the music in the series is absolutely sublime. Each character has their own track, and these tracks are, to me, just as memorable as Street Fighter's character themes. And I guess Capcom felt the same way, as they're either reused or remixed for future titles. Beyond each assigned theme, there were special themes for specific encounters later in the franchise, such as the Masamune vs. Yukimura theme. Additionally, TM Revolution provides the opening music for most of the games, with the only exception being the original release of the second one. The stages are always the highlight of these games, as they show off more of the characters, their personalities, goals, and how they go about achieving them. Unfortunately for the first entry, a lot of this is subdued, with only a handful really showing any memorable personalities. Northern Suppression is a land covered in snow, Hojo is protected in his mighty fort in Odawara Castle Siege, the incident at Honnoji is set ablaze with the flame of betrayal, and Zavi Castle is just weird. Most stages also carry with them hazards and even missions, such as chasing down Masamune before he reaches the end of the area, protecting your army against the Takeda cavalry, which can actually be ended early by defeating Yukimura, and guiding a bomb to destroy the gate in front of Odawara Castle, to name a few. However, a lot of stages are empty battlefields with either dull and forgettable or non-existent missions, which hold back their full potential. This, paired with a small selection of stages, capping at 18, makes a lot of them feel the same, especially as you play through these selections with each character for their story. As such, you tend to start skipping battles as you reach the end of character stories, or, if you're a completionist like me, as you're grinding and farming for those final drops. Even while recording this footage, I would tend to put the speed boost item set on to blast through areas quicker. Wrapping back around to the story, there isn't much to see here either. Each character gets an intro, and those of the same faction share the same intro, has the potential for a rival battle if their designated rival doesn't perish before you get to them, and an ending. Of all the games, this one has the most one-shot feel to them. The endings, as summed up, are Nobunaga shown conquering Earth, Nohime taking a very sinister bath, Ranmaru writing about his hero, the Demon King, Yukimura, Takeda, and Sasuke's endings all lead into one another, beginning with Yukimura and Takeda broing out again, followed by Takeda talking to Yukimura about the future of the clan, and ending with Kasuga just straight up killing Sasuke, I guess. Kenshin and Kasuga follow a similar thing, but their ending ends with a much less climactic hug. Well, maybe not less climactic for Kasuga. After Tadakatsu's Tokusatsu intro, his ending eventually shows him resting for another battle, another day. Shimazu beats a volcano into submission, Itsuki returns home to rest, Zavi launches a fireworks show with his abominations, the Maedas get a nice reunion, and Masamune, why, he learns of the horrors of war and loss. I don't know why his got so serious, but sure. Overall, the game's theme is very much history-light, and the canon the future games would go on to follow isn't really introduced until the second one. Hell, the main rivalry between Masamune and Yukimura isn't even really a presence here. So, how does Sengoku Basara fare today? The game still plays well, and even as someone who began with the future entries, I was finding myself enjoying seeing where it all began. But, even as a first entry, it's pretty mixed. Beyond the gameplay, there's a lack of charm and identity that the series would go on to be known for. Considering the rough development of this entry, I'm neither surprised nor disagree with the choice to focus more exclusively on the characters than the world as a whole. There is some of the ridiculousness of the later entries, but we're not quite at the level of barrel rolling horses yet. While a lot of stages and even the story are forgettable, it is a game that tells what it wants to through these characters and how they feel in battle. Though, even that isn't perfect due to the clones both in enemy officers and even in Kasuga and Matsu. Kasuga's moveset is mostly Sasuke's, save for one move. Matsu, however, has no original moves, borrowing from Kenshin and Toshie. And this leads me to kind of wonder how late they were added to the roster. But to think that the characters alone were enough to sell the game and that the sales were able to warrant a sequel is something that does pleasantly surprise me. It was actually the highest selling game the week it came out. If you're new to Basara and in the English-speaking world, it can be a bit hard to recommend this as a starting point. Despite there being slim pickings for your choices, there are two main reasons for this. First, though the gameplay is good, it can get old fast in comparison to future entries. Second, the Sengoku Basara one that's available in English isn't exactly Sengoku Basara. So, Kobayashi produced a game with a kick-ass cast that played fast and loose with Japanese history and won over the hearts of haters and fans alike. The scenario and the unique presentation of these otherwise familiar and oft-discussed historical figures is the selling point of this franchise for history buffs and casuals. So, what does Kobayashi decide to do in his infinite wisdom when localizing the game? Why, remove all of that and place it in a generic dark fantasy world, of course. Surely, that can't possibly end poorly.
My men are being slaughtered! Someone destroy! Quickly, now!
Oh my god. So yeah, first things first, all of this was Kobayashi's decision. He specifically wanted to match the tone and feel of the first Devil May Cry, or at least how most people in the West would think of it, ditching the history angle in favor of gothic castles and demons. Well, they tried? I think the thing that bothers me the most about Devil Kings is the fact that it's so half-assed. There are animated cutscenes in both games for the rival battles, and they still show the Anno Domini dates in Devil Kings, which makes no sense with the, and I use the heaviest of air quotes here, lore of the game. Speaking of, it's certainly there, I guess? I mean, these names are not creative at all, which isn't even the most immediate issue. It's more so that these characters' backstories describe nothing about who these fantasy OC variants are supposed to be. Like, yeah, Sengoku Basara frames these warlords in the context of its Sengoku Japan, and not as an encyclopedia entry the way Koei Tecmo talks about them. but it still follows the history to a degree. As for Devil Kings, who are these people? Why are they aligned with each other? Why do they hate each other? You've given me nothing, Kobayashi. Plus, they removed some characters from the roster, so they shrank an already small pool. Taking a game that already had a bare-bone campaign and trying to inject a fantasy world into what is essentially 15 minutes of cutscenes is not going to end well. And this isn't Dark Souls with its tasteful obfuscation of lore, this is just not well thought out. And I guess I understand in theory why Kobayashi wanted to do this. Non-Western history was hard to sell to people back then. Hell, it still isn't really easy to get people on board today, but Onimusha wasn't localized to appeal to people who aren't Sengoku scholars, so I don't really know why he ultimately felt like this benefited the game in the end. The voice acting is also, as demonstrated earlier,
Help! Somebody help! Mimi in danger!
cringe, and some of it is so bad it's good, but most of it isn't.
I am the demon that rules this fair land. Arslan.
Now the thing is, there are some things about Devil Kings that, dare I say, are better than the Japanese version. For one thing, the few stages that are redesigned are pretty memorable. I won't lie, I dig Akachi... oh wait, I'm sorry, Reaper's new aesthetic. And the mech on the Matsu/Bramble stage is super awesome, I love it. It's just a shame that there are a lot that are relatively unchanged, and it doesn't seem like it follows a super consistent logic for it. And they actually added a neat gameplay mechanic called priming, where pressing triangle primes the target, turning their health white, allowing you to deal more damage for a time. The logic behind this mechanic is that you prime an enemy, deal more damage, reprime, and repeat. They accommodate the moves by having skills be utilized with R1 plus square or triangle, though this caused a downside overall, as many skills were removed from the game. Also, they changed a couple of the Basara skills, which is more so weird than it is good or bad. Another odd choice is that Devil Kings is objectively harder because they made Japanese normal mode easy and hard mode normal, on top of handicapping experience gain for lower difficulties. Devil Kings is a bit of a meme, understandably, within the fandom, and it didn't do too well. I sometimes think about how different this series would have been had it been localized as just Sengoku Basara from the start, especially considering nowadays, whatever Basara stuff is available in the West is marketed as such. Would it have been more popular? Would it be among the ranks of frequent Capcom releases? Who's to say? I try not to dwell too hard on the what-ifs in life. And that was Sengoku Basara, a game with a rough start to its development that managed to turn it around in the end to kickstart an over-the-top action series. Given the game's first success, as mentioned earlier, Capcom greenlit a sequel that would be released the following year. Next time, we'll talk about Sengoku Basara 2 and its expansion, Heroes. Thank you so much for watching this video, it means a lot to me. This is my first real YouTube video, and I know I have a lot to improve upon, so it really helps that you watched until the end. You know the spiel. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're interested in other things I'm doing, please follow me on Twitter and Twitch. I've been away from those for a while, but I'm back, and once again, thank you very much.